11:52 p.m. You open your banking app by reflex. Not because you want to. It's almost as if your body does it on its own. The screen lights up. The number appears before you have time to prepare yourself. A paycheck had come in that afternoon. You had seen the notification a few hours earlier. In that moment, it created a very brief feeling. Not exactly relief, just a small pause in your mind. Like, at least for now, I can still breathe. But then the money starts to leave. Not loudly, not dramatically, nothing like a disaster, just one charge after another, quietly doing exactly what it was meant to do. Rent is deducted at 6:03. Insurance auto runs at 6:05. The credit card payment due goes out at 6:07. 3 subscriptions you don't even remember signing up for still keep pulling money as if they have the right to be there forever. Then at 11:48, another small fee appears. Not big enough to make you panic, but enough to create that deeply unpleasant feeling when you know it showed up at exactly the moment your account was already close to the bottom. That's the worst part. Not because the amount is large, but because the timing is always precise in the most infuriating way. You didn't do anything wrong. You still go to work, still wake up on time, still finish your tasks, still get paid, still pay what's due. Still try to keep everything under control the way an adult is supposed to. From the outside, nothing looks too bad. No one looks at you and thinks you're falling apart. You still function normally, still go to work, still reply to messages, still show up in the right place at the right time, still look like someone whose life is okay. But the money doesn't stay long enough to become anything meaningful. It doesn't stay long enough to become a cushion. It doesn't stay long enough to become choice. It doesn't stay long enough for you to see it as a tool. It passes through your account like water through a pipe. It stops by, then moves on. You look at the remaining balance. It isn't zero, not yet, but close enough that you understand those two states don't actually feel very different. When your account is that low, a small gap on the screen doesn't really change what is happening inside your head. All it takes is one small problem. An unexpected car repair on the way to work. A medical bill insurance doesn't cover as fully as you thought. A day with reduced hours. A week between jobs. A phone breaking at exactly the wrong time. And everything goes right back to where it was. It doesn't take a major event. It doesn't take tragedy. One badly timed expense is enough. You're not sitting there thinking about investing, not thinking about compound interest, not thinking about retirement, not thinking about financial freedom the way people online talk about it. Those concepts feel very far away, almost like they belong to a different layer of life. What you were thinking about is simply how not to break this month, how not to put more on the card, how not to delay one bill by sacrificing another, how not to let everything collapse at once. And tomorrow morning, you'll wake up, still go to work, still keep going, still start again as if nothing happened. That is what makes this colder than it looks on the surface. It doesn't feel like a fall. It feels like a loop, day after day, month after month. There is no moment of total collapse that gives you the right to clearly name the problem. There is only the feeling of being eroded. A kind of exhaustion not severe enough to become a crisis, but steady enough to become life itself. And the strange thing is, you are not the only person living like this. Most people are in that state. They earn money, they spend money, they repay debt, they manage, they repeat. From the outside, everything still looks like it's functioning. But underneath that surface is a much simpler truth. Money leaves their hands faster than they can hold on to it. Not because they are lazy, not because they are stupid, not because they haven't read enough finance books or watched enough videos about money discipline. Many of them are doing almost everything right. They go to work regularly. They don't spend recklessly in some insane way. They try. They adjust their budget. They remind themselves to be more careful. They blame themselves every time they spend on something unnecessary. They live with the feeling of having to be responsible with money almost every day. And they still stay in place. Or worse, they move forward just a little, only to be pulled right back the moment a small disruption appears. If you look long enough, you begin to see that this is not entirely random. There is a structure behind all those small movements, something that does not appear on the banking app, does not appear on your paycheck, does not appear in payment confirmation emails, but it is present in every transaction, in every debt schedule. In every moment, you are forced to make a quick decision simply because you don't have enough room to breathe and wait. You do not see it directly, but you live inside it. You think the problem is that you haven't saved enough. That is how most people are taught to see things. Earn more, cut more, be more disciplined, optimize more, try a little harder, fix yourself a little more. But the real question lies somewhere else. Are you ever actually allowed to keep money long enough? Not touch it, not see it appear in your account for a few hours, but keep it there long enough for it to begin changing your position. This video is not really about milestones like $0, $1,000, $10,000, or $1 million. It is not that kind of neat journey where you climb one step at a time and everything gradually gets brighter. Real life does not operate as cleanly as an infographic. It does not move in a straight, tidy line from scarcity to abundance. It does not reward effort in such a simple way. This is a different story. This is the story of why most people never get to keep money, even when they do almost everything they were told they were supposed to do. This is the story of who benefits when you are always living without buffer, always forced to react, always forced to make decisions under pressure, always forced to accept the conditions already placed in front of you. And it is also the story of something that is very rarely said directly, because once it is said, a lot of financial advice starts to sound far less clean. Money in your life does not change simply because your income changes. It changes when power changes. When you have the right to wait, instead of being forced to decide immediately because a payment deadline is approaching. When you have the right to refuse, instead of having to say yes to a bad job, a bad contract, a bad loan, simply because you have no other choice. When you have the right to let money stay, instead of watching it get pulled away before it has time to become something that can protect you. That is why the language of levels often makes everything too neat. It sounds as if all you have to do is go far enough and you will enter a new tier. It sounds as if everyone is on the same road, only separated by the number of steps. But that is not true. There are no clean levels. There is no fair straight line from low to high. There are only thresholds. Thresholds you may or may not be able to cross.
Subscribe for more story about money, power, and the system.
And this system does not allow everyone to cross them in the same way. From the beginning, most of what you were taught about money started with one very simple assumption, that if you earn more, you will save. That if you are more disciplined, you will accumulate. That if you invest early enough, time will do the rest. It sounds very reasonable. It is even partly true. That is why it is convincing. But it leaves out one detail large enough to distort the entire picture. You do not operate in a vacuum. You are not an individual standing alone in life, making a few correct decisions and then being rewarded with proportionate results. You are inside a system. And inside that system, there are other players. There are other capital flows, there are other incentives, and those incentives are not always aligned with helping you keep more. On one side is you, the one selling time in exchange for income. You exchange hours of your life, energy, focus, health, and sometimes even peace of mind for a stream of money that comes in on a cycle. On the other side is the employer, the one who decides how much you get paid, when you get paid, and in many cases, how stable that flow of money will be for you. In between sits the bank, the credit card, the financial institutions. The entire mechanism built to turn your short-term shortage into their long-term income. A little further out are investment funds, asset managers, places where money is not merely kept, but multiplied. Not through direct daily labor, but through structure, yield, and access. And over all of it sits a consumer economy where everything is designed so money keeps moving, not staying, moving, from you outward. You receive your paycheck. The paycheck goes into your account. The account is immediately split apart. Part of it goes to fixed costs: rent, electricity, water, internet, insurance, things that do not negotiate with you. Part of it goes to debt repayment: credit cards, car payments, student loans, obligations prioritized above even your sense of safety. Part of it goes to consumption: gas, food, unexpected fees, costs you cannot eliminate entirely simply by living more disciplinedly. And if there's anything left, only then does the remainder get a chance to become savings. That is the default flow. That is what is happening before you even start thinking about investing, optimizing, or financial independence. And if you only look at things at the level of personal decisions, it becomes very easy to conclude that everything depends on your discipline. That if you are good enough, you will escape. And if you have not escaped, maybe it is because you are not good enough yet. But if you step back, stand a little farther away, the picture changes. This system is not designed to maximize how much money you retain. It is designed to ensure that money keeps moving. That is a very big difference. And once you begin to see that, you will understand why saving is much harder than people tell you it should be. Not because you lack discipline, but because you are trying to hold on to something that many parts of the system were built to pull away. If you want to understand what is truly keeping you in your current position and what would actually need to change for you not to remain stuck in the same loop, then the next part is where the machine starts to show its face. You begin to see that your money is not exactly disappearing. It is being pulled away in very systematic ways. You begin to realize something deeply uncomfortable. It is not that your money disappears in some vague sense. It does not evaporate. It does not vanish into thin air. It is being extracted, layer by layer, in ways that are regular, completely legal, completely normal. So normal that if you do not stop and look long enough, you will think this is simply how life works. You leave money in the account. It sits there. The number remains unchanged. At a glance, everything seems fine. But then time passes, and that same number begins to buy less. There is no sound warning you. No notification pops up to remind you that its value is being eroded. It is just a morning at the supermarket when the bill comes out higher. A trip to the gas station when the number rises faster than before. An insurance renewal where the new premium is higher than the old one. The same amount of money, the same account, but your purchasing power, your ability to choose, your room to breathe, quietly shrink. That is how inflation works when it moves through real life. It does not need to touch your bank account to take away what lies behind the number. And because it does not take it suddenly, people often accept it like weather. They get annoyed for a moment, then adapt. Then continue. But the price of continuing is that you have to run faster just to remain in the same place. Then something goes wrong. It does not have to be a major event. It only has to happen at a bad time. A medical bill, a car repair, a week with reduced hours, a month when too many things come due at once. Something in the house breaks at exactly the moment you have no margin left. You look at the account, you calculate again and again, you tell yourself maybe you can still manage. Then you reach for credit. That is the moment many people still call a solution, but in reality, it is just a form of delayed payment with a fee. A credit card sounds neutral. It sits in your wallet like a tool. neat, clean, convenient. But in reality, it is the way the system turns one moment of weakness into a longer stream of income for someone else. You only need one swipe. The problem in front of you is pushed back. The sense of urgency disappears for a few minutes. You can breathe a little longer. But the cost does not disappear. It only changes position, from the present into the future. And when it reaches the future, it does not arrive alone. It brings interest with it. Interest is something very few people fully feel the first time it appears, because each individual number is usually not large enough to shock you. They are small, fragmented, seem bearable, but that is exactly why they stay. They remain from month to month. A minimum payment, a small percentage, a few dozen dollars, then more, then longer. One rushed decision this month becomes a quiet obligation stretched across many months after it, sometimes across many years. And the strange thing is, you can live with it for a long time without ever naming what is actually happening. You just notice that every month, part of your income no longer belongs to you. You work, you get paid, and before that money has time to become a choice, a part of it has already been reserved to pay for a decision you were forced to make at a moment when you had no room to breathe. Then there are the smaller things. The things not large enough to make you stop, but regular enough to keep you in the same place. A subscription you could use or not use, and it would hardly matter. A free trial you forgot to cancel. A purchase made because splitting it up feels easier. A buy now, pay later click because it sounds lighter. A food delivery app adding a few extra charges that make dinner cost more than you thought. A very short tap on the screen in exchange for very real money leaving your future. Everything is made easier, faster, lower friction. No one has to force you very hard. No one has to deceive you in some blatantly obvious way. They only need to make spending smooth enough that you do not feel its full weight at the exact moment you agree to it. And that is the paradox at the heart of this system. The less buffer you have, the more money the system makes from you. The easier you are to surprise, the easier you are to charge. The more quickly you are forced to react, the less chance you have to choose a better solution. The more you live near deadlines, near the bottom, near the limit, the more expensive each decision becomes compared to someone who has enough room to breathe and wait. Your fragility is not just a condition. It is an economic position. And from that position, many people at higher levels can make money. If you look a little deeper, you begin to see another flow appear. Not just the flow of money, but the flow of power. The employer pays you on a cycle. It sounds completely normal. And most of the time, you do not think much about that. But that normality is exactly what makes it powerful. Because when you depend on money arriving on the right day, regularly, without interruption, then you are not only dependent on income, you are dependent on the rhythm of the person paying it. That means your life is tied tightly to a payroll schedule. If you do not have enough buffer, you do not have the right to take a long break. You do not have the right to wait for a better opportunity. You do not have the right to say no when the conditions are too bad. You may hate that job. You may know it is wearing you down. But the cold truth is that many people still have to go back the next morning, simply because bills do not care how exhausted they are. Banks are different. They do not need you to be mentally stable. They do not need you to be happy. They do not need you to feel like you are living well. They only need you to keep paying. Credit cards, loans, interest rates, penalty fees. All of them form something that is very rarely named in everyday life, yet it powerfully shapes every choice you make. Obligation. Obligation prevents you from deciding as freely as you think. It narrows the set of options you can choose from. It makes some doors that appear open in front of you never truly real choices. You are not choosing between multiple paths. You are simply choosing the less painful version among what remains. Meanwhile, those who own assets operate under a completely different logic. They do not live primarily by selling each hour of their day. They own things that can generate cash flow, yield, dividends, appreciation, rental income, equity growth. Those do not require them to show up somewhere every morning to begin running. They do not have to exchange each block of living time for each new unit of income. Their money continues to operate even when they are not directly touching it. And you? You are still working to make money leave you a little more slowly. That is a very large difference. And if you watch long enough, it begins to change the entire way you understand the word money. Money is not just a resource. It is a mechanism of control. It determines whether you can wait or not, whether you can refuse or not, whether you can choose or not, whether you can slow down to think or not. And if you cannot hold on to it long enough, you do not just lose money, you lose breathing room, you lose position, you lose the ability to choose before you even realize you once could have had it. Once you see it that way, the question is no longer, how do I save more? The real question becomes, how is cash flow actually moving? Where does power actually sit? And who benefits each time a portion of your income leaves your hands? Because behind everything that seems separate in personal life, there is a machine. And that machine operates with very clear logic. Where money goes, where power sits. And when something breaks, who actually absorbs the shock? To see that clearly, you have to look through 3 layers, not as a personal finance lesson, but as a system running through you. The first layer is cash flow. If you have no savings, everything starts very simply. A problem occurs. You do not have cash to handle it. You use credit. Credit turns into debt. Debt generates interest, and interest is a portion of your income being redirected away from your own future, upward. That is a very real transfer. It is not loud. There is no single villain standing there taking everything. But it happens clearly. From those without buffer to those who own financial tools. From fragility to profit. From a personal shock to institutional revenue. You may not see the direct recipient, but you will feel the direct consequence. Every month, before you even decide what to do with the money you just earned, part of it has already been set aside for past obligations. It slows you down. It delays you in investing. Delays you in accumulating. Delays you in any attempt to change your position. But when you have a small buffer, the picture begins to change. The same problem, the same bill, the same broken car, the same bad month. But you do not have to touch the card. You do not create a new obligation. You do not drag a present expense into the future with interest attached. You preserve a pause. That pause is extremely important because it gives you the thing people at the bottom usually lack most: optionality, a moment to think, the ability to delay a bad decision. A chance to handle a short-term problem without turning it into a long-term burden. That is not wealth yet, not freedom yet, but it is the point where your life becomes slightly less reactive and slightly more intentional.
Subscribe for more story about money, power, and the system.
Then, when you have real capital, the flow reverses. Money no longer only leaves you, it begins to come back. Not because you suddenly work harder than others, not because you become smarter overnight, but because for the first time, you own something that can generate cash flow without requiring additional units of labor from your body. You begin to see dividends entering your account, see interest generated from assets, see capital growth doing work that your income used to carry alone. Money begins to work for you instead of simply passing through you. That is the moment many people first understand why asset owners talk about money so differently from those who live entirely off a paycheck. They do not see money as something that must be re-earned every month. They see it as a structure that can reproduce, if left in the right place long enough. But cash flow is only the first layer. The second layer is power. When you have zero savings, almost every important decision is forced by time. You cannot easily quit a job, cannot negotiate for long, cannot patiently wait for a better opportunity. A bad offer can still become the offer you are forced to accept. A toxic environment can still be the place you must return to, not because you do not see the problem, but because you do not have enough breathing room to pay the cost of rejecting it. In that state, you do not truly choose, you react. You react to payment deadlines, to payroll cycles, to the fear of an insufficient balance, to the possibility that an unexpected cost will derail everything. When life is constrained like that, it is very hard to speak of freedom as a real concept. But when you have a few months of expenses saved, something very small begins to appear. You can say no. No to a bad job. No to unreasonable terms. No to a decision that must be made immediately. No to panic selling something. No to accepting anything just because it shows up when you are desperate. That is power in its most basic form. Not glamorous, not loud. No one sees it, but very real. When you have more capital, power becomes more complex. You do not just choose yes or no. You begin to choose risk, choose timing, choose tax structure, choose advisors, choose allocation. Choose which cash flows to prioritize and which risks you are willing to accept in exchange for long-term outcomes. You are no longer just living inside the system. You begin to navigate it. And at higher levels still, power is no longer just about the amount of cash you hold. It is about access. What opportunities you are allowed to enter, what conversations you are allowed to hear, what networks you are introduced into, what doors you get to see before the majority even knows they exist. Not everyone sees the same map, and not everyone is given the same keys. The final layer is consequence. When the system runs smoothly, everything looks fine. Salaries are paid, debts are serviced, cash flow continues to move. Banks earn interest, investors earn returns, businesses generate revenue. On the surface, it is a stable state. It can even be called normal. Until an individual breaks. A payment comes late, a bill cannot be fully paid, a decision is made at the wrong time, a job is lost, an asset is forced to be sold in a bad market, and immediately costs appear. Penalty fees, higher interest rates, forced liquidation, delayed investments, lost compounding. Those consequences do not disappear. There is no black hole absorbing all losses. Loss is simply redirected from your position into someone else's revenue. From your panic into someone else's return. From the moment you are forced to sell into someone else's opportunity to buy. The machine does not stop when you encounter a problem. It simply finds another place to assign that cost. From you to another layer. That is how it absorbs loss. And when you see this clearly, savings is no longer just a nice number on a screen. It becomes a position within the system. A position that determines whether you absorb shocks or have the ability to push those shocks elsewhere. A position that determines whether you are always forced to sell your time cheaply or begin to have enough breathing room not to react immediately to every pressure. But to hold that position, you do not just change the amount of money you have. You change how you think, change how you fear, change the speed at which you react, change the way you see others, work, consumption, and risk. Because this system does not just process money, it shapes the people inside it. And if you live in it long enough, you begin to see yourself change across very specific thresholds. At the level from $0 to about $1,000, financial life is almost entirely survival. You react to everything. You feel ashamed about things others consider small. An unexpected bill can keep you awake at night. A declined card can stay in your mind longer than it should. You look at simple things like fixing a car, paying insurance, buying a flight home as tactical challenges, not normal life expenses. You become alert to money almost instinctively, not because you enjoy control, but because one small lapse can cause everything to slip. From about $1,000 to $10,000, you get your first breathing room. Not much, but enough to realize that not being choked every time something happens is a real change. You can absorb a small shock without immediately falling into credit. You begin to understand what a buffer feels like. But at this stage, many people learn another lesson, one that is more painful. Breathing room does not mean safety. One bad month, a round of layoffs, a large medical bill, a move, an expensive breakup, and the money you worked so hard to accumulate can be pulled down faster than you expected. This is the zone of hope and fragility. You can see an exit somewhere ahead. But you also begin to understand a cold truth. With bad timing, you can still be pushed back. From $10,000 to $50,000, many people begin to understand that discipline alone is not enough. You can be good at saving, invest consistently, avoid obvious mistakes. But if your work structure is weak, your income easily disrupted, your living costs too high relative to your position, or you encounter an event large enough, everything can still shake. This is the stage where you begin to understand that money is not just behavior, it is structure, the way your life is arranged. The stability of your income, the flexibility of your costs, the environment around you pushing you in certain directions. Then from $50,000 to $200,000, money begins to feel less like emotion and more like a system. You no longer see every expense as a direct hit to survival. You start thinking in allocation, in percentages, in timelines. You no longer ask, "Do I have enough?" in each moment. You ask, "Where should this cash flow go to create a better position later?" But you begin to care about tax efficiency, portfolio construction, downside protection, concentration risk. Money is no longer just something that makes you anxious. It becomes something you have to learn to manage. But even at those higher levels, the system never stops reminding you that escape is never a clean, straight line. You lose a job right when the market declines. You face a health event when your capital is locked in illiquid assets. You go through a divorce when you need to preserve capital. You move cities when living costs surge. You invest correctly at the wrong time. You thought you escaped. You didn't. That line sounds cold, but it is true. Not to make things pessimistic, but to remind you that finance is not a game with permanent checkpoints. Every threshold you cross only changes the nature of risk. It does not eliminate risk. It changes how risk finds you. And most importantly, you do not become a hero in this journey. There is no final stage where you step out of the system as a completely free individual untouched by it. On the contrary, you often become a product of the incentive structure you live inside. You become more patient, but also more cautious, more disciplined, but sometimes more distant. You see consumption differently, see time differently, see how others make decisions with money differently. Not because you are better than them, but because the system has taught you a different language. Then at some point, you begin to realize that the path you thought was moving up no longer looks the same. At the beginning, everything sounds simple. Earn money, keep more, invest consistently, move slowly but steadily. It sounds logical, sounds fair. Sounds like if you persist long enough, everyone will eventually get there. But then something else appears. Not more discipline, more doors. Some people have employer matches. Their money is multiplied not necessarily because they are smarter, but because they are in the right company, the right position, the right benefit system. Some people have access to tax-advantaged accounts, not a small difference. A structural difference. The same dollar earned can be taxed, retained, and grown very differently depending on where it flows. Then, some people hit the Roth IRA limits and begin thinking not about whether to save, but how to go around the limits. Some begin to talk about tax strategy in a completely different way. Not how much do I have to pay, but how do I structure income and assets so the system treats this money more favorably? At those layers, the story begins to change color. Then, at another threshold, new rules appear. Accredited investor, private deals, opportunities not available on public markets, deals not offered to the mass market. What you do not see is not because you are lazy, not because you are uninformed, but because you do not yet meet the conditions required to see them in the first place. That is when access becomes more important than effort. At those levels, leverage is cheaper. Advisors are better. Information arrives earlier. Opportunities are presented differently. And more importantly, reputation begins to function as an asset. Your name, your network, your social signals begin opening doors even before actual capital is placed on the table. You do not just have money. You have the right to be invited into a game that many people do not even know exists. That is when the big illusion starts to break. Not everyone walks the same path. Not everyone plays the same game. Below a certain level, the story is discipline, how much you retain, how you control spending, how much delayed gratification you can tolerate. But above a certain level, the story is no longer effort. It is entry, whether you are allowed in or not, whether you get to see the opportunity or not, whether you get to play under those rules or not. Two people with the same amount of money but different access will not arrive at the same place, not at the same speed, not with the same friction, not with the same outcome. And when you expand the view beyond the individual, that difference becomes even clearer. Those with large capital do not just buy assets, they buy time. They buy better tax structures. They buy the ability to delay obligations. They buy deal flow before it becomes a product for the public market. They buy the right to choose when to enter and when to stay out. Those without capital, or with capital but without access, usually can only buy what has already been packaged for the mass market: mutual funds, ETFs, retail products. They are not useless. Often, they are still good options, but they are the end of the distribution chain, not the beginning of advantage. You are not excluded from the system, you are simply placed in a different position within it. And from that position, you play by different rules, at a different speed, with a different level of friction, and therefore with a different outcome. At this point, the board fully opens up. It is no longer a single path upward. It is a multi-layered network, where doors only open with the right type of capital, the right network, the right timing, the right signals. And if you look long enough, you arrive at an uncomfortable conclusion. At some point, wealth is no longer built purely by effort. It is protected by structure. And when you reach that conclusion, you begin to see something even harder to accept. This system is not designed to bring most people to freedom faster. It is designed to keep running, to keep capital circulating, to keep liquidity flowing, to keep debt service consistent, to keep participation predictable enough for the surface to appear stable. Continuity of capital, liquidity, debt service. Predictable participation, surface level stability. Those are what the system optimizes for. Not your freedom, not your dignity, not your ability to exit early, not whether your speed of escape is fair compared to others. A system like this does not need you to fail completely. It does not need mass bankruptcies. It does not need obvious collapse. In fact, that would create noise, trigger reactions, expose the machine. It only needs one thing: you to remain dependent. Continue working. Continue borrowing when needed. Continue paying when due. Continue living inside a flow of money whose final direction you do not truly control. And if you can do that for many years, the system works perfectly. No major drama. No crisis strong enough to force everyone to look at the core. Only a surface-level sense of stability. Everything is still running. And because everything is still running, many people confuse not collapsing with being okay. But those are not the same. And when you see things this way, you understand why financial freedom is not the default outcome. It is an exception that goes against the natural logic of the machine. It requires not just money, but position, structure, access, timing, awareness, and sometimes luck. This is not an abstract idea in books or macro charts. It is happening in your daily life. You see it when your salary increases, but the feeling of pressure remains. Because living costs, obligations, social expectations, and everything that comes with a higher standard of living rise according to a certain logic. You may not always name that logic correctly, but you feel its result very clearly. You see it when you invest for years, but still do not feel safe. Your portfolio may be larger, your account may be greener, but the feeling of being caught between uncertain future and present costs remains. Because safety does not come only from having assets. It comes from the structure around those assets, and your position within the system when markets, work, health, or life suddenly shift. You see it when a small debt stretches into years of pressure. You see it when housing prices, insurance, healthcare, retirement, market volatility, all seemingly separate topics, are actually connected by the same logic. Who retains optionality? Who loses it? Who absorbs shocks? Who converts shocks into advantage? And the most dangerous thing here is not that you do not know enough financial tricks. It is that you believe in the wrong story about how this system works. You think you just need to try harder, be more disciplined, save more, invest earlier. All of those things have value, but if you do not know where you stand within the flows of money, power, and consequences, you can do many things right and still remain in the same place. Because changing your financial position does not begin with technique. It begins with awareness. You have to see the machine, understand where it is pushing you, know which parts of your life are leakage points, dependency points, points of exploitation. Recognize what is personal behavior, what is structure, what is a polished narrative designed to make things sound more fair than they really are. And when you see that clearly, you do not just change how you use money. You change how you decide, what you accept, what you refuse, what you call progress, what you call safety. And that is the real beginning of getting out. Return to the initial moment. A person just received their salary, looked at the balance, and thought the problem was simply that they needed to try a little harder, work a bit more, cut a bit more, save a bit more, add another layer of discipline. They think the goal is to reach a number, a level where everything will be okay. But the problem was never just the number. The problem is the structure continuously pulling money out of their hands before it has time to become power. And if they do not see that, they will continue playing inside the same loop, just with bigger numbers, a higher salary, a larger account, a different lifestyle, but still the same core outcome. Money passes through them faster than it serves them. This was never just about saving money. It was about whether you could hold enough of it long enough to stop living inside someone else's system.
If this story changed the way you see money, subscribe for more deep story about finance, power, and the system behind it.